Today in Roach Reflections I want to talk about my favourite float fishing reel, which is the Mitchell Match. These reels in real terms are, I don't know whether you call them vintage or obsolete. There certainly hasn't been a proper Mitchell Match since the late 80s. The reels I use date from either the very late 70s or the early 80s. The history of the Mitchell Match goes back a long time. The original standard Mitchell, which was the 300, also called a sort of standard reel, was invented in the late 1940s. It had a half bail until 1954, when the patent for the full bail held by Hardy's expired. So after that it got the full bail, and a year later, 1955, the automatic bail arm that we see on the Mitchell Match turned up on a reel called the 330, the automatic. A bit later, Mitchell started to make high-speed versions of the 300. This is a 410A, but the original 410. So it's a 5-to-1 gear ratio instead of about 3 or 3.5 to 1 of the 300. But it's still got the standard bail arm of the 300. It's got a slightly longer handle, and it's got this torpedo handle there. So some bright spark came along and thought, and it's not that difficult. You can't do it by taking a 300 and a 410 or a automatic and a 410 to create the match. So you got the 5-to-1 gear ratio, the automatic bail arm, and initially you got that torpedo handle. And these reels were around certainly from, I don't know whether it's the late 50s or early 60s. Didn't really catch on. Milbro held the rights in the UK, and towards the end of the 60s, Barry Wellham set up Garcia Mitchell to market the reels much better, and we started to see changes. It's not that hard to change a torpedo handle to the twist grip handle, which is far nicer to use. The match anglers prefer that. The spools changed as well. There were already deep and shallow spools, but an ultra shallow spool, which is what all these are, came along. The button used to stick out a bit. Ivan Marks in the very late 60s suggested, why don't you recess it, make a broader button. So we got a better button on the front of the spool that didn't catch the line. And the reel evolved a bit more in the 70s. The bail arm didn't originally have a roller in it. That came along. That made it better. It's not a true roller, but it's better than the old, I think a bit of tungsten carbide on the wire. And eventually you got the 440A. It got renamed the Match along the way, and that's got a reinforced reel stem there. And that's basically it. Towards the mid 80s, started to get black versions of this, and some of those eventually were made in, I think, in Taiwan. I don't think they're as good. The gears changed a bit. There was also in the 70s and into the early 80s a super high speed model, which is the 840. This is an 840. There's an 840 Match, which this has had the handle change. It would have had a torpedo handle. It did when I got it. It's got the AntiReverse on the top. 6-to-1, not 5-to-1, and the handle's even longer. It says 6-to-1 on there, longer than the Mitchell Match, and the handle on the Mitchell Match is longer than that on the 300. I don't know if you can see that, but it's each one, as the gearing goes up, the handle gets a bit longer. The very final Mitchell Matches had a flat handle, which is what this one's got. There's not a twist grip to it. And some of the replacement handles that people saw sometimes are these flat handles, which I don't like at all, like the twist ones, but twist ones do wear out. So what's so fantastic about a Mitchell Match? Well, the first thing is you got that auto bail. It opens very fast, one-handed casting. You just do it and you're away. People say you can't close it manually. Yes, you can. You just pull it over when you're fishing. Quite fiddly here, and then you just flick the lever back into position and it's closed again. So if you've hit a very fast moving fish and you're worried about doing it that way, which is the normal way, you can do it. And while we're on the subject, people say the same thing about the 300, that you can't close it manually. Yes, you can. There's a little lever there. You just flick that out of place and you close it you can close it manually. So you can do it. So the first thing, automatic bail arm, fast retrieve, just about the right speed. The line lay on these is absolutely perfect. You need to fill up the spool so that it's well filled. They're designed to take 100 meters of 3-pound line, but that's probably a thicker 3-pound line than we use nowadays. So I tend to use a little bit of backing and then put 100 meters on top of that. And I'd recommend you don't use anything over about a 4-pound line. People do use 7-8-pound line on these. I've had 1 or 2 of these given to me that have been used with 8-pound line, and people have hooked the far bank or trees or snags or something and then tried to wind against 8-pound line to cause a break off, and they've wrecked the gears inside. They've done damage to the reel internally. These reels do get noisy. I'll do it right by the microphone. They can be shimmed up. This one's a little bit slack, and this is the one I use an awful lot on my videos. It's been rebuilt by a service agent. It's now got a black plate there that says lightning cast, which is probably a US market plate. The AntiReverse is slightly different. I saw off the end of the AntiReverse on some of the reels so that when I'm using it and I put the rod between my legs with the reel there, I don't accidentally knock it on. So that's easy to do, and then I'll just file off the rough edges, the sharp edges. I'm pretty brutal on reels. This one's had, like I say, it's had a new bail arm as well. It's been shimmed up inside, but it works very well, and they do need a lot of maintenance to work well. So what's the advantage of these reels over other reels? One of the differences with these reels is the way the line comes off. If you're looking at that, that's coming off clockwise. And if we look at a Shimano, the line's coming off anti-clockwise when you look at it. And that means with the Shimano, the line is coming on the inside of your finger there. And on the Mitchell, it's the opposite. It's on the outside of your finger. Now, people going right back to Dick Walker, for those who can remember him, have said that the Mitchell, it goes round the wrong way. It's got more complicated gearing. That's why the direction of travel is reversed by an extra gear. But I've found, and I've tried this pretty hard, that in certain circumstances, the Mitchell is better. You can feather the line better by just moving your finger out of the way. I find them much better for really fast water. The other way around, it's more sort of drags, more difficult to do. The reels, because the line lay is so fantastic, they're fantastic for fishing light stick floats, and you can fish a stick float at range. You can throw a properly balanced stick float on a fine line. We're talking 1.5 pound or 2 pound main line, a long way. Floats like the John Dean stick float cast incredibly well with these reels. Of course, you can reel back, and there's no jags. Anyone who says, oh, fixed spool, the float goes down in a series of bumps, and the centre pin, it goes down perfectly smoothly. Well, the sort of sticks I'm talking won't make a centre pin revolve at all, and at any range you're fishing differently. So for me, they're a very versatile reel, very good for fishing a waggler, stick floats and Avon floats, which are pretty much my my river fishing. On still waters I'm fishing wagglers quite a lot. I tend to use the 840 on still waters. It is physically a heavier reel. It's got better gearing inside. On a river maybe it's a little bit too fast. I did buy one of these in about 1979 or 80, and after 3 weeks I took it back and swapped it for a 440 and got a bit of money back. The price difference of about £7 or £8 back then. If they made a Mitchell match nowadays, it would probably cost about £150 in today's market. I don't know what they, I could probably look it up, but I think they were about £30 by the time they went out of production. There were later reels called Mitchell matches that are nothing like this. They're a totally different reel, made by Mitchell, but they're not the same. This reel, believe it or not, is 40 years old. It's mint unused. It's actually an unused reel. It hasn't been bedded in yet. It probably needs a little bit of lubrication sorting out on it. I've got other ones that are probably nearly as good as this that I do use. What I tend to do though is to take reels like this one that's been hammered and just keep hammering them until they beg for mercy, really. I've got 1 or 2 donor reels, 2 or 3 that sort of work, and this one's getting the handle's pretty loose. The handle is worn smooth. There's quite a bit of play on the actual handle on the pin there. It probably needs a new handle ideally, probably not worth bothering with. So in a nutshell, there you have it. The Mitchell match is a classic reel. It's got its faults. They're noisy. They need lots of maintenance. You need to grease different bits of it. The gearbox needs just the right amount of light grease. You need to oil 1 or 2 bits on the bail arm. When you take the spool off, you can see a hole there in the baffle plate, and as you come round, I'm just going to close that, you will see at one point a little metal cylinder through the hole. Let's come really close on that. And that pushes against a cam to close the bail arm, and that cam, which is on the back of this baffle plate, this metal plate there, must be greased. But you can cheat. Rather than take the reel apart completely, you can just grease that little round metal disc that you can see, and that will apply some grease to the cam and get it going. If that is running dry and you're closing it with it dry, it wears that plastic cam out. And those baffle plates, although there are all sorts of spares still available, certain things, bail arms and those baffle plates, you will not find, not in mint condition. I wouldn't mind a few 3 or 4 baffle plates would do me fine to replace ones that are broken or worn out, and they do wear out. And that also, that metal piece on the end of the lever does wear out as well. That gets a flat. You can actually turn that metal piece on that lever. It's pretty brutal, it's not easy, but you can turn it so it's got a round bit on it instead of a flat. It's not ideal. Some people have actually managed to engineer that round piece so that it revolves. You need to be a far better engineer than me to make that up. You'd need to make that up on a lathe and really know what you're doing with a little bearing, and then the reel becomes even better. They are prone to tangles. You get lots of tangles around this part of the bail arm. The line tends to catch around there in different places. But I think they're worth it. One thing I'll show you with a little clip here is that if you I fish with the AntiReverse off, and you can put, because there's a fair bit of inertia within the gearbox, if you try and backspin them, they don't really backspin. I'm getting line all over the place here. But what it means is you can let go of the reel, you can have the anti-reverse off, let go of the reel handle. You don't need to control it much. You might need to stop it going round if you've got a very fast moving fish, or slow it down with your finger on the back, but you can use it. If you try and do that with a reel like this Shimano, which is now getting line everywhere, if you take the anti-reverse off, which you sometimes need to do to let off line as you get a fish really close, and you let go of the handle, this thing will, I'm going to take the line off because it's going to get line everywhere. It will do this, it will spin wildly. Now if you've got line on there and that's doing like that, there's going to be great loops of line all over the place, all around the reel, a complete and utter bird's nest. A reel like this one in many ways is 10 times better engineered than the matches. If I could put the engineering of this into a match but without losing that drag related spin, then I'd have a reel for life. This is a Stradic 2500 and it's nearly 20 years old, and about the only maintenance it's had is a spot of oil on the bail there. That's it. No grease needed. No, they are sealed for life. They're incredibly well made. The Mitchell gears by comparison are some cheap old metal. They do wear out, they do lose teeth. The 840's got a better gearbox, a better quality on it for some reason. That's probably why it's a bit heavier, and they probably don't wear out so much. And these 840s are worth quite a lot more money than the matches. So if you do want to buy a Mitchell match, you can either go to one of the tackle fairs. I think there's one in Redditch twice a year and one at Romsey twice a year that are advertised in various places. It's good if you can pick up a reel and look at it to check. If you're buying off eBay, buyer beware is the only thing I can say. If it looks tatty, it probably is tatty and well worn, and you may find that it works, but it's very, very noisy. You can't tell, all you're seeing is pictures of it. At the moment there's about 20 on eBay, 20 Mitchell matches, a couple of 840s. Some of those are probably extremely good reels, like my mint one here. Others may be well worn and a lot worse than this worn one, which is the same age as the mint one, but this one's had a lot of work done on it to keep it going. This is almost like a 1960 Mini that's had all the parts replaced, the engine rebuilt, the wings and the sills replaced and everything else. But some of those old reels, they're corroded, the gears are bent inside, they're worn, and you may be able to use them, but that's it. The other good thing about Mitchell matches is that there are millions of spools out there. There are millions of old reels. The spools aren't that expensive. You need to find the ultra fine match spools. You don't want the other sort. They do have a channel ring round there that because it's got a little bit of steel wire in there, that rusts away and that disappears. You can replace it with a bit of fine wool twisted tightly. That will do the trick if you can fix it in there. I hope you've enjoyed this ramble about Mitchell matches. They're still my favourite reel. Maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but I enjoy the challenge of using them. If they were totally useless, I wouldn't use them. I still use my Shimanos for trotting, occasionally a centre pin if I feel so inclined. And that's it for now on this edition of Roach Reflections.